Thank you, and thank you very much for the introduction and from DNV and to everybody here and online, obviously, because I'm also going to talk about trust and the ability to share data relying on trust. Now, I'm going to start from the premise that you can do most good and have the most effective digital twin if you combine data sources. So that specifically doesn't mean building brand new sparkly 3D models every morning with a drone flyover that has no hope of connecting with yesterday's or tomorrow's. It also doesn't mean investing in separate systems for different suppliers to manage a project information and then asking for a printed out PDF at the end of it, which will never be used. Instead, let's start from the optimistic point of view, that reusing data means that we can reduce rework, waste, and organisational friction. And also that the planet is better off without another server bank making us all hotter. Now, I'm summarising Marcus Calliola's blog on this slide when I say that sharing data is not a zero-sum game, and we should try to both use it and share it. So we need to talk about the data and the technology that it sits in. Oh, I'm doing my own slides. Good, right. So let's talk now. Sharing data is not unlike toddlers sharing toys. It's much easier to share other people's. And now there are many ways to share that works for everybody. So consider the mythical apple tree in my garden. I do have the zero food mile, low technology option of me and my family consuming our apples. And we'll make sure that we grow the right type, that we grow our favourite type, we pick them at the right time and store them carefully. And that doesn't mean that we have our own secret Excel spreadsheet of apples in the basement. Now, in addition, at certain times of the year, I may have an excess of apples. And I may choose to give some of my crop away. And the consumers of my windfalls are absolutely cognizant of the risks that they're taking in the bag full of slug-infested and bruised windfalls. But they can make the decisions with that. And perhaps I also have a neighbour who produces excellent plums, and together we make unbeatable crumble. So for them, I take care to pick out my good apples, and then I get good pears and usable fruit in return from which I can generate value. Now, finally, and in extremis, I may go to the enormous lengths of investing enough time and money to enter into a contractual agreement with a supermarket. Now, the advantage is, of course, that I'm going to get cash for my apples. But we need to make the decision about whether it's worth the time and money of investing to make that transaction possible. Now, each case is different, but everybody feels they've won in both sides. But you don't need me to tell you that when we're dealing with digital twins for data for digital twins, we're not dealing with apples. We're dealing with data, which has been compared to many things. Now, it is true that data like oil is a raw material for business, but like soil, it supports both productive and unproductive use cases. Like roads, it can be used by multiple actors at the same time. And like plutonium, it has risks and costs in handling. I'm going to talk more about risks in a minute. But data is also quite likely to have quirks and errors within it. So to be put to productive use, the chances are that someone is going to have to put some work in to make the data useful, usable and used. And the question is, who foots that bill and how do they recoup their investment? So let's take a closer look at the list. So the risks. So first, let's start with FOMO, the fear of missing out. Is there a teeny tiny risk that you don't know, that you don't have a proper use case for sharing your data and you just want to buy some technology? So apparently, some people have done that. There's an article that says 70% of IT spend is driven that way. Secondly, it is possible that your CFO's mind is completely dominated by the GDPR risk, the risk of legal breach when it comes to personal data. And let's be fair, a 4% annual turnover fine, or maxing out at 17.5 million, would focus the mind somewhat. But there is also the need to manage the physical and cyber risks, to abide by copyright legislation and ethical and good practice guidelines, because there are significant disruption costs and reputation risks associated with failures of data stewardship. And I'm not even going to start by talking about the risks associated with biased, exploitative, short-sighted and hallucinating AI models. So data stewardship. The framework is not static. The legislation is moving, and even if you're complying with legislation, it's possible that some of your stakeholders will be unhappy. So you can do three things. You can make sure that your data practices are transparent and open, and that you are abiding by them. There's a really handy explainer on the Open Data Institute website. I've got the link at the end, and I'm happy to share it. Be super clear on your use cases. Who are the beneficiaries of sharing the data through twins? And thirdly, who are you sharing it with? Because who you share it with and under what terms has a huge impact on the risks and the benefits of sharing information. In the same way that value exchange differs when giving away windfalls from an apple tree to contracting with a supermarket, sharing data with internal teams requires a different approach and a different amount of focus to creating a publicly facing digital twin with information about secure assets. But in all cases, sound data practices are an irreplaceable foundation. Balancing the value exchange can be tricky, and failure to consider the nature, timing, and recipients of benefits may skew investment decisions and make business cases, frankly, unobtainable. But because even maintaining access to open data has a cost, and so were the industry initiatives like open banking and the National Underground Asset Register, for example, has worked really well by making it embarrassing not to share data. But the good news is there are lots of interesting models that do exist where data has been shared effectively. The economic models around TfL's open data investment may be high-spirited, but certainly it's made us all much more intelligent bus users, and for that one might argue there's enormous benefit. LexisNexis work on a contributory database that supports car insurers. And that not only makes the industry more efficient, but also provides industry players with services that they value. The EU health data spaces have been created to support patient care, so where the data subject is the beneficiary of the outcomes. And we're all quite familiar with how we support Google's business model. When we're thinking about customers of shared data, we need to be careful, of course, about bad actors. We can be hopeful that everybody is benign and works with good intent, but that may or may not be the case. So engineering the fair value exchange in data it can be tricky. There are no easy answers. Everybody, I think, is going to say that today. And fixing data and digital practices is not a job that will end with a simple system implementation. There are big risks to manage, and the threat, legislative and public perception are moving fast. But it is possible, and the alternatives of another layer of incompatible, unusable, and unused data sources is worse for productivity and for achieving our net zero ambitions. Come and have a chat, and let's see if we can make it work. Thank you very much. I think the story of data is really important. So if you understand the story of your data, why it was collected, what it was used for, what it was optimized for, then you can work with it very richly. So absolutely, there's no such thing as absolute data quality.
Brilliant. And that goes straight on to the next question, Miranda, for you, if that's okay, which says, Miranda, how do you think organisations and senior management in particular who seek digital twins for the sake of it can be better informed about leading with the use cases rather than the shiny tech?
Isn't that a lovely question? So I had the great privilege of earlier this year interviewing a whole load of infrastructure CDOs. And I asked them how they got their jobs done. They all had really different languages to describe what they were trying to do and how they got it done. But there were three things that they all kind of did. So the first thing is they had a safe space where they could do stuff quietly under the cover. So the place they got out of their BIM palace, which is a lovely phrase I heard yesterday. So instead of like holding hard to a standard, they just did some stuff that worked. And rather than nobody conforming to anything, they found a space where they could do things. They built communities, so they enabled people around them and built enthusiasm. So they were social, they weren't just technical, and finally they delivered hard. So they got benefits, and they could be trusted to deliver, and that meant that they were less overridden as a community. So when we discussed this together, they felt that they were able to resist the clamour from the C-suite for some piece of shiny tech if those things were all in place.
Very good. Thank you, Miranda. And no BIM palaces, as you say. Miranda, our question for you next, if we may, is how is trust going to be implemented? In particular, secure identity, provenance, and governance.
Right, so I start with, you can't implement trust. It's not a technical solution. It is a carbon to carbon, not a silicon to silicon interface. So it's about people and it's about relationships, and it's about understanding each other's needs and wants and aspirations. So I'm fascinated to know if somebody thinks that it can be implemented. And I apologise to the questioner for taking the mick, but there isn't a technological solution. The other thing that makes me a bit quirky, angry, is the notion that all data is personal data, and that all regulation is personal data regulation. So if I've complied with GDPR, that's fine. It's all put to bed. So not all data is personal. And therefore, we need to think about more than personal data regulation. There are some excellent secure and identity, and IOTICS would be delighted to talk to you about ways to federate the management of gateway and authentication. So there are some technical solutions, but it's a carbon-based interface.
Very good. Thank you, Miranda. I like that. Carbon to carbon, not silicon to silicon.
I would add the problem with a sort of a cross-modal digital twin is often there's no customer for it, and particularly in DFT. If you were to sell integrated transport, to whom would you sell it? But I think Merrilt is the only exception and the great hope for this.
Yes. Thank you, Miranda. Final question for you, and then we're going to come into land with a question that is a great question to ask after this, as you can see from the screen. What are some innovation collaboration models that have proven effective in large-scale digital twin projects? How can small and medium enterprises participate and benefit from the digital twin ecosystem?
I'd like to thank the soul that gave me this question. The truth is we haven't seen many good ones, but I'm dying to be corrected by the community on this. On that slide I put up, I think we've seen some financially resilient collaboration models. Have we seen them in the digital twin space? I mean, some people might argue that those are digital twin spaces. So I gave you my best examples, and you'll notice that there weren't many SMEs within it. And it depends very much what role the SME is playing. You can be like IOTICS, and you can be the infrastructure that supports it, or is just as important, one might argue, as having SMEs in the ecosystem of people who are sharing data. If only the big guys are sharing data, we're missing out big style.